The anime begins with a play in which Yuka is the protagonist alongside a classmate. After the performance, she receives praise from the entire audience and informs them that there are spots available in the drama club. Later, Atomu-kai congratulates his friend and the main character of the story, Buntarou Hojo, as he was the one who wrote the play, although Buntarou claims he was inspired by an original work. Afterward, Buntarou leaves school, greeting several acquaintances on his way. He then arrives at his job in a restaurant where he serves customers kindly. When his shift ends, he is on his way home when he encounters a friend handing out flyers for his concert. However, he notices a student from his school, Saiyuki Kuroda, staring at him from across the street, but she soon disappears. That night, Buntarou returns to his apartment, where his neighbors greet him as he seems to be a very kind and well-liked young man. While at home, he hears the doorbell ringing incessantly and rushes to answer, thinking it's his classmate Yuka, but it's actually Atomu. Suddenly, Yuki appears and jumps at the protagonist. They say they came to thank him and celebrate the success of the play. Later, the friends are on the building's rooftop, celebrating their triumph. Although Buntarou finds Yuka a bit annoying, he also appreciates her. Eventually, the girl falls asleep, claiming that coming to Buntarou's house healed her heart. Once the others are alone, Atomu asks Buntarou if he filled out the form regarding their future plans, but he admits he hasn't, and neither has Atomu. The next day, Buntarou arrives at class to find a dispute between two girls. He decides to intervene, and one of them suggests they organize the class forms by year, class, and number. Without hesitation, Buntarou takes charge and asks his classmates if anyone has free time to help, allowing them to resolve the issue with the class president. Kuroda then approaches Buntarou to give him a form before walking away. Later, while in the bathroom, Buntarou notices Kuroda watching him, which makes him nervous. She enters and confesses she has been observing him, asking to talk privately somewhere else. They agree to meet in a park, which makes Buntarou a bit happy. But when other students enter the bathroom, Kuroda quickly leaves, putting him in an awkward position. That night, Buntarou shares what happened with Kuroda with his friends. Yuka and Atomu speculate that she might confess her feelings, but Buntarou doubts it, insisting she's not like that. Yuka then suggests calling a friend who is an expert in these matters. During the call, the friend mentions that the situation might be different. Kuroda could be asking about something specific or wanting to join a club, advising Buntarou not to get his hopes too high, but it could lead to something romantic. The next day, Buntarou goes to his meeting with Kuroda at the park, where she behaves mysteriously, surprised by how he understands her tastes and reacts appropriately in uncertain moments. Meanwhile, Yuka and Atomu watch from a distance, eventually getting bored and leaving since nothing seems to be happening. Later, as their date concludes, Kuroda tells Buntarou he is as she expected, complimenting his communication skills and giving him a memento from the place. She then asks if he has any dreams, referencing fame and money, noting that talent is essential for achieving them. They share a small connection over bishoujo games. Afterward, she takes him to a store where she shows him various games with different prices based on their popularity. She asks for his help in writing a script with different scenarios as she wishes to create a game. After a few days, Buntarou returns to school very exhausted, leading his friends to joke that he's involved in an erotic game. However, upon arriving at school, the protagonist finds an envelope in his locker, and his friends assume it's a love letter. But in reality, inside are many bishoujo games, which he tries to hide from his classmates. Kuroda then appears, revealing that she was the one who left them for him. Later, Kuroda takes the protagonist to the marketing research club, where she is the president with the intent of having him study everything about bishoujo games. However, the club is actually dedicated to bishoujo games, and Kuroda starts showing him all the achievements she's earned. She then asks him to study the topic and recruit at least 6 people, as they need a writer, which will be Buntarou, a producer, herself, a director, CG artist, programmer, and voice actor, Seiyo. Buntarou thinks this task is impossible, but Kuroda explains that it was common in her brother's company. Buntarou agrees to do it, but says they'll need to find someone obsessed with this type of game, which annoys Kuroda slightly. She insists it's not an obsession but a path that has taken people to great heights. That night, the protagonist tries to study this new world, but finds it difficult and doesn't understand it, so he focuses on recruiting new members. The next day, Buntarou tells Kuroda that he's managed to bring some people, but even though he's pleased, Kuroda isn't impressed, as none of the students are capable of filling the necessary roles. So they need to find other candidates. Later, Yuka and Atomu appear at the club. The two introduce themselves to Kuroda despite being in the same class. Buntarou suggests adding Yuka to the team because she's a talented actress and could take the role of Seiyu. Yuka is excited and says that even though she doesn't know much about bishoujo games, she's good at doing voices, so they have a new recruit. However, Atomu asks to join, confessing that he doesn't have any special talent but wants to help. Kuroda proposes he assist the other members with small tasks, although some of these might not be so small as he would be a director. However, she feels his motivation isn't enough for the club. Shomu becomes irritated and reveals his true self, confessing he had his heart broken in a relationship. Kuroda, seeing his potential, decides to accept him into the club. The new members then wonder what they'll do once the work is done, and Kuroda tells them they'll go on a trip. Later, the group travels to Akihabara to show them what they'll do after finishing the project. The plan is to sell the game, just like many others who create this type of work. Afterward, the day ends and the protagonist says he has to go somewhere, asking the others to leave. But everyone knows what he's up to. Before he goes, Kuroda gives him some advice. Buntarou then goes to a maid coffee he had wanted to visit, but upon entering he finds Teruha Ando, his classmate, working there. She treats him very kindly and sweetly, which surprises him as it's so different from how she acts in class. She asks him to call her Luca, her work name, and also to keep her secret, as she doesn't have permission from the school to work. This surprises Buntarou, who doesn't know what to say. The next day, the club members are shocked to see Buntarou looking tired as he stayed up all night studying. He mentions he was playing a game created by Kuroda's brother. Later, the protagonist tells the producer they need to recruit the other members, but Saiyuki still leaves the task in Buntarou's hands. That evening, the protagonist finishes working and goes to a bookstore, where he finds a lovely note. He tries to ask a girl about it, but she runs away. The shopkeeper explains that they only receive them and, upon seeing how beautiful they are, decide to display them. The next day, Buntarou shows the note to the club members, revealing that he investigated and discovered the artist Hokio is very talented, and that her real name is Yuki, one of their classmates. Later, they leave a note in Yuki's locker. Upon reading it, she thinks it's a love letter and goes to the meeting spot, but becomes terrified when surrounded by so many boys and runs away. Despite the protagonist's attempts to speak with her later, he doesn't succeed. Then Ando approaches Buntarou to ask if he revealed her secret, but he admits he has other things on his mind, like creating a game. Teruha is excited by this, even more so when Buntarou tells her they found Hokio. This leads Ando to contact Yuki and invite her to join the club. Although nervous, Yuki agrees to be their siege artist, and Teruha asks to be the programmer. With these new members, the team is complete, and Kuroda gives them a copy of the game they will create. After the events, Kuroda proposes to the members that they go on a training camp, which excites everyone. The next day, they all gather, except for Ando, to go on the trip. The protagonist is surprised by the large suitcase the producer brings, but she says she needs everything she's carrying. During the trip, Kuroda tells the protagonist that the purpose of the trip is to explore and find locations that could be useful for the game's graphics. They should also talk to the others, as each member might have their own ideas. Upon arrival, Yuka is excited but ends up falling over. Yubasu tries to get the luggage, but the others tell her to relax and enjoy the trip. They explain that to begin creating the story, they need to be relaxed and focused, so they start by doing various tasks around the area. Later, the group gathers for a meeting, but no one has much energy after a long day. Buntarou says they can't start since Ando hasn't arrived yet, but the producer insists they record the meeting anyway, with Buntarou and Atomu in charge. However, no one pays much attention to Kuroda. The meeting is interrupted by Yugaisu's growling stomach. Then the group starts dinner, but the protagonist notices Yuguizu seems uncomfortable. At that moment, Ando arrives, saying she brought many things to better understand the subject. However, Kuroda reprimands her, saying she has no right to do so after arriving late. This creates a tense atmosphere between the girls. At night, the boys take a bath, but something begins to intrigue the protagonist. He asks his friend what he thinks about working on fictional projects. His friend replies that writers or creators try to fulfill their desires. Then the protagonist asks Yuka, who compares it to a love story, while Yuguisu says she simply imagines things in her head, which makes her want to illustrate them. The next day, a discussion breaks out between Ando and Kuroda. The game's producer wants to finish the project by November, which Ando finds impossible, especially for a group of beginners, as it requires a lot of graphics and time. Saiyuki wants to create a basic but complete game, which may not be of much value but could be achievable since 60% of it is in the illustrations, with the rest in promotions. She plans to use a game company, saying that if they sell 8,000 copies, they'll make more than 10 million yen, which they'll use for the next project. Ando argues that they never discussed the project in the meeting, as she had read the notes. At this point, Kuroda starts asking the others for their ideas, but ends up rejecting them all, saying they are not useful, and that they can't risk the project just for fun. The goal is to win. Ando, feeling puzzled by the need to win rather than enjoy the process, decides to leave the group. She apologizes to Buntarou since he had asked her to join, and everyone ends up feeling depressed about what happened. Later, the protagonist tells Kuroda that the meeting was impressive because for the first time, they were able to share their ideas all thanks to Andu. He says she is essential to the group. Determined, he goes after her, visiting her at work to ask her to return. He explains that thanks to her, they were able to share their ideas since they don't know much about games in that world, and only she can help. It's also the first time he feels like he can accomplish something. Andu agrees to return. Later, Andu returns to the camp and suggests once again that they should have fun while making the game and at least change the situation. She suggests making the story about two strong sisters who fight and turning it into a BL game. However, as she proposes this, Andu realizes that's what she wanted all along and gets excited, deciding to stick to the original concept because she finds it enjoyable. Atomu also gets excited and starts acting wildly, completely losing control. In this way, the members decide to start their project and have fun while doing it. At night, the protagonist and Kuroda meet alone. She thanks him, saying that thanks to him, she was able to find the other members and that he made her realize she could also have fun while creating the game. With her brother's experience, she didn't think it was possible. However, Yuka arrives and sees them talking, feeling jealous, so she hides. The next day, the group returns home, but on the way, they think about what name they should have. After some consideration, they decide to call themselves Rokuhara. After a few days, the protagonist tries to write but can't manage it, especially with Yuka talking behind him, which distracts him a lot. Meanwhile, Yugusu is very excited as she starts drawing. The next day, the members gather and Kuroda apologizes to the protagonist for not organizing the materials for each scene. However, he asks her not to apologize since he's only written 3 lines of the story. This surprises everyone, and they realize that this task has become quite difficult for him. The producer comments that he seems caught up in something impossible and advises him to just write a short, concise story. That night, the young man excitedly starts working on it. After 5 days, Buntarou finishes the story and hands out the script to everyone, feeling proud of it. But after reading it, the members tell him it's good, which leaves him feeling anxious and disappointed since he was hoping to amaze them all. Upon hearing this, the protagonist says that good isn't enough. Andu suggests she should change a few things to add more excitement, like creating a strong character. But Yugusu interrupts them, saying that after reading his script, she was motivated and drew the protagonist. Everyone is amazed by her skills, and Kuroda asks her to do the art for the website, which Yugusu agrees to. Later, Buntarou asks his boss for some time off from work, and the man kindly tells him that if there's something he wants to do, he should do it until he feels satisfied, as he'll arrange for someone else to cover for him. The next day, the protagonist can't make any progress, so he decides to take a break. While heading to the bathroom, he notices Kuroda watching him and she asks him to come with her. They arrive at a restaurant where they meet a famous writer who is a friend of hers. The man seems very outgoing and friendly, so the protagonist takes the chance to ask him what the secret to writing is. Realizing that the boy is stuck, the writer gives him some roundabout advice before finally saying that he just needs to start writing little by little. After the man leaves, Buntarou realizes he was naive to think there was a trick to it, but he's inspired knowing the writer became successful through perseverance. This sparks an idea and he rushes home. The following day, the protagonist presents the revised script to his friends. After fixing the issues, everyone is pleased with the new version, which is now much more exciting. Yugusu mentions that she'll need to work harder now. Once the script is finalized, Yugusu shows the protagonist some new sketches. Everyone is surprised that she managed to complete them in just 1 day. However, when they notice her losing balance, they realize she hasn't been sleeping well because she's been pushing herself too hard. They ask her to take care of her health, but she insists on continuing to work and then resting afterward. However, Yugusu hasn't been able to rest properly, which leads to her feeling down and unable to draw. Her friends urge her to take a break again, but she refuses, wanting to keep going. A few days later, the group notices that Yugusu hasn't come to class because she has a fever. Yuki, in a sleepwalking state, says she wants to keep working but collapses from exhaustion and ends up in the infirmary. The team decides to take a break since they haven't gotten any new work from her due to her fatigue. Later, the team leaders go to visit her, and Kuroda suggests they shorten the story to match the drawings Yugusu has already completed, allowing her to rest. But Yugusu wakes up and asks them not to shorten it, saying she wants to keep going because she was excited to know they liked her drawings. The protagonist and Kuroda convince her to shorten the story, assuring her they'll wait for her to recover. After a few days, Kuroda shows the group the music and backgrounds for the game as they are ready. Hearing the music and seeing the animations, the group gets excited since everything is coming together. Now it's Andu's turn to program everything. The next day, the protagonist returns to the club, even though it's summer because everyone is still working. Ando mentions that summer isn't just about beaches, but also battles, referencing the upcoming Otaka Festival, where the group will gather information. Then Yuka starts teasing Buntarou because she's bored, but Andu announces that the first part of the game is ready. After combining the code, the group gets excited as they see their progress start to look like an actual game. However, as they go along, they notice some issues with the script. The protagonist says he didn't change it, so they assume it might be a game bug or a virus. But Kuroda notices a strange look on Yuguesu's face and immediately realizes Andu is responsible. She asks why Andu changed the script without permission. The programmer admits she did, believing it was better to take that direction since she could fix some errors while coding. However, the producer forbids her from making changes without approval, so the red-haired girl has no choice but to restore everything to its original state. Later, the group says their goodbyes to head home, but Yuguesu follows the protagonist because she wants to tell him something. The next day, the protagonist confronts Andu, having found out that not only did she change the script, but she also altered Yuguesu's illustrations, giving the characters different expressions. The red-haired girl doesn't deny it, saying it would take the project in the right direction, and she felt it was the correct decision. At that moment, the rest of the team arrives and learns what happened. They get upset with Andu for adding more work for the illustrator and for making decisions on her own without consulting anyone. They also discover that she hadn't been working on the website. This causes another confrontation between Kuroda and Andu, and as a result, the programmer decides to quit the team again. The group starts to regret what happened, saying they need Andu because she's the only one who knows programming and has helped in other areas of the team. But Kuroda isn't sure if she should come back. The next day, Andu is at the dock when her mother calls, asking her to help with work since she has free time. Andu refuses, but her mother mentions that her teammates came by to visit her and are planning to come back, so Andu agrees to go to work. Despite their efforts, the club members couldn't get Andu to rejoin the team as they found out she left for a fishing job. They decide to give up. However, when Andu is about to leave, Buntarou is there to accompany her, and she has no choice but to accept his company. During the fishing trip, the young man is amazed by all the challenges the fishermen face as they set off in rainy weather and dangerous tides but still manage to reach their goal. Later, Andu thanks him for coming, and Buntarou tells her that they want her back. They had gone to her house but couldn't find her. He also enjoyed spending time with her and for that reason wants them to finish the game together. Although Andu is concerned about getting along with Kuroda. The next day, Andu returns to the club and everyone is happy to have her back. Although they expected tension between the girls, Kuroda simply asks her to catch up with the rest, which makes everyone feel relieved. After several days, the team members arrive at the beach and everyone is excited. However, Kuroda uses the moment to take pictures, thinking it might give her some good ideas. The girls take the opportunity to enjoy the sea, but Kuroda refuses to go in, saying that the sun's rays are harmful to the body. So she stays under the umbrella with Buntarou and Atomu. However, Teruva and Yuka set a trap for them and threw them into the water. Kuroda then suggests that playing volleyball might give her some ideas. Later, the group starts a beach volleyball game with Yuka putting in a lot of enthusiasm. Unfortunately, Kuroda gets hurt by a hit from the ball, and Atomu momentarily loses his focus when he sees a happy couple. Later, Buntarou takes care of his friend after she gets hit. Kuroda admits that she's supposed to be having fun, but she doesn't think it's possible in a 2D world. To help, she asks Yuguesu and the other girls to act out scenes from their game to spark some ideas, but it doesn't go well. The group then enjoys a barbecue, although everyone brought the same ingredients because they wanted to try them. Afterward, they find a watermelon, and after some discussion, they cut it open. Everyone loves how sweet and delicious it is. However, Kuroda notices that Yuka swallowed the seeds, and she warns her to spit them out, saying they'll grow inside her, a belief her parents told her. The others laugh, explaining that it's something parents say to scare kids when they're young. Later, the group arrives at the hotel where they're staying. When they see the view, Yuka and Yuguesu are captivated, but they soon notice Kuroda and Teruva arguing over the room. They resolve it by playing rock, paper, scissors, and then suggest going to the hot springs. Kuroda decides to stay behind for a bit and says she'll join them later. Meanwhile, the protagonist is in his room when Kuroda interrupts him. She wants to ask him a question about what he thinks of swimsuits, making Buntarou nervous and unsure how to respond. Kuroda explains that she wants him to use those thoughts for writing the script, saying that without those insights, he wouldn't be a true writer. She leaves it as a request. Kuroda then visits the girls in the bath and asks them a rather unusual question about what size they prefer, which doesn't go over well. Later, the team gathers at the beach to set off fireworks. Andu apologizes to Kuroda for causing problems earlier, but Kuroda just says she hopes they can work together until the end. At night, the boys wake up and realize they're in the girls' room. Quietly, they leave without making a sound. Afterward, Atomu expresses his excitement about how the game will turn out, and he credits Kuroda for inviting them to be part of the project. The next day, Yuka finds Buntarou's laptop, and after reading it, she goes to visit him at the beach. She starts remembering how Kuroda's comment about the seeds was something Buntarou had also said to her when they were kids, making her realize that he hasn't changed much. She tells her how happy the trip made her, as it's the first time they stayed somewhere like that. She then decides to go into the sea, but just as she's about to call for him, Kuroda shows up and scolds Buntarou for losing track of his laptop. Yuka starts feeling jealous of their relationship and runs off, leaving Buntarou and Kuroda confused. Finally, the team heads back from the trip, but on the way, Kuroda and Andu begin arguing about the game's plot. The protagonist starts to wonder if this trip may have created a rift in the team's relationship. After several days, the entire team is gathered, but Buntarou is stuck again on the script. One of the members tells him they need the script to continue, but he says he can't move forward because he's stuck on the part about the date. He can't relate to the main character. Andu realizes it's because he's never been on a date before. The group starts discussing the issue since it's a problem, but Andu keeps teasing Buntarou about it. In response, he asks her how she's confessed to someone she likes. She admits she's never done it. Despite looking for answers, no one has any experience in this area. Later, Buntarou tries to get information from close friends. When he speaks to one friend, the guy gets too close to him and Atomu rescues him, explaining that this friend is into men. That night, the friends gather at Buntarou's apartment, where Atomu mentions how strange it is that Yuka hasn't been with him lately. They suspect she's involved in a love triangle they don't know about, but the bigger issue is solving Buntarou's problem. The next day, Buntarou calls the writer he had spoken to before. The writer advises him to create a realistic story with a touch of wild imagination, drawing from his desires. The following day, Buntarou shares his ideas with the team, but everyone thinks they're pathetic. Unsure of what to do, they all try to offer suggestions. Just then, Yuka arrives, acting distant with Buntarou. Despite this, the group continues brainstorming. Atomu suggests that the main character should confess to his sister, and Yuka begins acting as the character, while Buntarou tries to follow along. However, no one likes his response and they just ignore him. After the meeting, Buntarou suggests to Kuroda that it might be a good idea to use a love letter. Taking the idea seriously, she leaves what's supposed to be a love letter in his locker, but it ends up sounding more like a threat. Later, the pair head to the rooftop, where Andu and Rizz are waiting for them and splash them with water, though only Kuroda gets wet. The team tries creating different scenarios to inspire Buntarou, but after listening to and acting out all the ideas, Buntarou says he'll think about it because he doesn't feel convinced by any of them. Later, Yuka visits Buntarou. He asks if she's mad at him, as he's noticed her behavior, but he assumes it's because the script isn't progressing. She tries to express her feelings but can't, so she suggests they go somewhere else to clear their heads. Buntarou suggests it could be a date, which makes her nervous, though it's just a simulation to get ideas for the script. The next day, Yuka and Buntarou go on their date. She gives him negative points for how he's acting towards her as they simulate a date. As the day goes on, she tries to find out if it helped him with the script, but he's unsure if it did. Yuka attempts to confess her feelings but can't manage to do it. Still, she thanks him and says she'll finish telling him why she's grateful once he finishes the script. Later, Buntarou calls the writer to share his idea, but the writer likes it so much that he says he's going to post it on social media. Despite Buntarou asking him not to, the writer hangs up. After what happened, the protagonist receives a call from Kuroda, who tells him he will be put under confinement until he finishes the script. After hearing the helicopter, he runs to his apartment door, but when he hears it leaving, he feels it's all over. However, his door opens and it's Kuroda, who says this is the end of Buntarou. When he sees her, he starts to fear for himself, but she didn't come alone, she brought the rest of the team. They enter his house, saying they'll work there while keeping an eye on him. Buntarou tries to get them to leave, but it doesn't work. Kuroda tells him he will be locked in his room until he finishes the work, and he only has 24 hours to do it. Buntarou tries to focus and start writing, but can't come up with any ideas. Because of this, he thinks it might be a good idea to escape. He plans to use his curtains to climb out of the apartment, but the team members enter his room and close the window so he can't escape, scaring him. Then he gets a call from the writer who heard he was trapped, but the call ends abruptly. He tries calling his boss, but the boss tells him he spoke to Atomu to make sure Buntarou can't get any help. Atomu then shows up, disappointing Buntarou, but Atomu insists it's for his own good. He also takes Buntarou's phone so he can't communicate or get distracted. Unable to continue, Buntarou hears a noise from outside, but Atomu arrives and tells him not to worry. Buntarou decides to take a short nap to come up with ideas. However, when he wakes up, he realizes he has slept too long and lost a lot of time. The rest of the team enters his room, saying they also fell asleep while planning to scare him, but it didn't work. The team says they'll proceed with their plan. They all dress up as maids to simulate a maid cafe and serve Buntarou to help him relax. Ando starts giving him a massage, but when Atomu tries to get close, Buntarou tells him not to touch him. Then Kuroda approaches, takes Buntarou's hands, and says she'll tell him something. While everyone expects something sweet, she only tells him the time he has left, making him feel worse. Later, Yuka brings him food, but during a dance the girls perform, Kuroda adds a strange ingredient to the food. Everyone panics, thinking she might be doing something illegal. A few hours later, Buntarou is still locked in his room. Seeing that he hasn't made progress, he starts losing control again and tries to lie down. However, Atomu is watching him, so Buntarou asks to go to the bathroom, though he's really trying to escape. But the window there is also locked. Meanwhile, the girls keep working, though Yugusu wonders if they're going too far, leaving everyone a little worried. Later, Buntarou asks to be let out at least to take a bath. The team opens the door and tells him that won't be possible. This upsets Yuka, and she asks everyone to leave him alone, saying they're overdoing it with the work. However, some think he should keep working because his delay is slowing everyone down. Yuka manages to convince them to let Buntarou take a bath. In the meantime, the team discusses giving Buntarou a reward if he finishes his part of the script. Yuka, however, is more concerned about him and decides to wait outside the bathroom. She tells him that everyone believes in him, even her. But she hears a strange noise and realizes he has fallen asleep. After putting him to bed, the team regrets letting him take a bath. Now, they wonder how they'll finish the script, as Buntarou has a fever. Still, he insists it's his duty to finish it. The next day, Kuroda wakes up and visits Buntarou's room. She finds him asleep, but sees he finished the work after staying up all night writing. As a gesture of thanks, she gives him a kiss without him noticing. When the protagonist wakes up, he finally leaves his room in the apartment, heading to the rooftop, where he meets Kuroda. She's blushing because of what happened, but she congratulates him for finishing the work. The rest of the team then arrives to congratulate him as well, and they give him a reward. Despite everyone's joy, Kuroda interrupts and tells Buntarou he now has to write the script for the drama CD and the novel, and he has only 3 days to do it. The torture is far from over. After a few days, Atomu finishes organizing the script, and after getting Kuroda's approval, it's Yuka's turn to practice her voice for the upcoming recordings. The next day, the team arrives at a studio to begin the recordings, where they are greeted by Aitu from Intro Productions. They also meet Tabe Sayaka, who will be the voice of the second character in the game. Tabe is surprised to confirm that Rokara consists of high school students. Then they meet the director responsible for the recordings. Kuroda introduces her team, and they notice that Yuka starts to get nervous. Even though the producer is in charge, Buntarou is left to give the character directions. The protagonist tries to explain the script, and Yuka notices Tabe making some notes, which seems to bother their voice actress. A few minutes later, the recordings begin, and the guest actress goes first. Everyone is impressed when they hear her voice, as it perfectly matches what they imagined for the character. However, Yuka doesn't seem too pleased. The guest finishes her script without issues in an hour, and then it's the team's voice actress' turn. The director says they will skip the trial since they've been told her voice is fine, and she says she's ready. But being nervous, she starts making mistakes. Once she finishes, her team says they have no issues, but both Kuroda and the director ask her to record some lines, having noticed flaws. Yuka records the script, and her teammates are satisfied with it, but Yuka isn't happy with her performance. She asks to record again, even requesting to do it standing up as she still isn't comfortable. After some time, the director calls for a break. However, Kuroda informs her team that no matter how much Yuka wants to try again, the studio has other bookings, so they need to finish today. During the break, Kuroda and Buntarou go to talk to Yuka. The producer is upset with her, telling her that many of her takes were approved and that she needs to finish the script, or they won't make the deadline. But Yuka can't accept that, feeling that everyone worked hard, and this is her moment to shine and deliver a great performance since she hasn't contributed much so far. The two girls are left alone to talk, and after the break, Kuroda announces that everything is resolved. Yuka manages to finish the script on time, and everyone is satisfied. However, when Buntarou goes out to see her, he notices she's upset and decides to leave. In the following days, the team's relationship with Yuka becomes distant as she isolates herself. Kuroda receives a message from the studio saying they need to re-record some lines due to background noise they couldn't remove. Kuroda tries to reach out to Yuka, but she doesn't respond, leading them to consider replacing her as the voice actress. Later, the protagonist finds his friend, but she runs away from him, nearly having an accident before he saves her. When they are alone, she confesses that she couldn't deliver a great performance because Kuroda had given her a time limit. Even though the team thought her recordings were good, she wasn't satisfied. She can't settle for good because, as a child, her parents told her she couldn't pursue acting with just a good performance. Her two friends were the only ones who gave her hope to keep going, and that's why she wanted to do her best in the studio. Shiken agrees that they should replace her, but Buntarou doesn't want that, so he takes her back to the club. When they get to the school, they overhear Kuroda on the phone. She tells them that they will be delayed in delivering the demo and needs to make some adjustments. Yuka knows it's her fault, so she apologizes. The producer reminds her that things often turn out better when you have a time limit and asks her to return to work with them because she can't imagine anyone else voicing the character. This makes Yuka emotional, and she agrees to do it. After finishing the recordings, the team is ready to release the demo in a week. Though some are nervous, when it's time to leave, Yuka thanks the producer for giving her another chance and for trusting her. Kuroda responds that it's just her job, though the recording was impressive. The next day, the team reunites at the club, but Kuroda receives a message from her brother. After a few days, some people are talking about the release of a new game and are surprised to hear that the writer is a high school student. Finally, the demo was released, and when Kuroda arrives at the club, she feels a strange energy. Everyone is searching for reviews of the game, and they finally find some. The team starts reading a lot of positive feedback, praising the voice acting and animation as well as Buntarou's story, which makes them happy. Kuroda tells them not to waste time, reminding them that it was just their first demo, so it's natural they receive good reviews, and they should aim to keep that momentum. However, they also notice that a company called Typhoon released a demo on the same date, so they decide to play it. As they start, they are surprised by the different graphics and story, which make them want to keep playing. This leads them to feel that they may never be able to produce something like that, but Kuroda encourages them to keep working hard because their project is very different and they're creating for a smaller group. This motivates them to keep working and improving. Later, the protagonist notices that the producer of the other game is someone named Oji Mitsuduru. At that moment, Kuroda mentions that Oji sent her a message and wants to collaborate with Buntarou. The next day, the protagonist meets with Oji. The director is surprised to see that Buntarou is really just a high school student who wants to know more about him. Buntarou explains that he started working on the game because his friend asked him to, and that this friend has a brother in the industry, though he doesn't know his name. Later, Buntarou calls the writer who always helps him, but when the writer leaves, Oji says he isn't interested in him because he's too old. However, Oji expresses interest in working with Buntarou. After they part ways, Kuroda shows up, having been investigating the competition. Buntarou says that Oji is a good person and wants their teams to work together, and Kuroda comments that it might be beneficial to collaborate. The next day, the Rokura team meets with representatives from Typhoon. In addition to Ogi, the CEO of Typhoon, Uesoteko, is also there. At first, she is very friendly, but then she starts talking to Rizz, complimenting her work and asking her to join their team, as well as Buntarou. Kuroda gets upset and says that it's not fair to recruit members of their team at will, especially since they thought they were collaborating, not having members poached, which would split the team apart. Ueso offers those she is recruiting good pay and the opportunity to attend classes to finish high school. This enrages Kuroda so much that she grabs a glass of water, but it is Buntarou who throws his water at the CEO, angered by her actions, as this wasn't part of the agreement. Ueso, furious, grabs Buntarou, but Ogi stops her. In response, the CEO challenges them to a sales competition, where the winner can recruit any member of the opposing team. Kuroda accepts, making the next game release the competition, and Ueso threatens to recruit Buntarou and turn him into her slave. Her colleague kindly leads her away, apologizing to Rokura. That night, Buntarou apologizes to his team for what happened, but they all agree that they need to improve the game to prevent him from becoming a slave. Kuroda says they need to perfect the game, and everyone agrees to help. The next day, the Rokura team focuses intensely on improving the game, fixing areas that need work. After finishing her part, Kuroda leaves on a trip, and later she calls the protagonist to tell him she has secured a deal for the launch event, which makes him very happy. She asks him what souvenirs he would like her to bring back for everyone. When he tells the group, they are happy to see how much Kuroda has changed. At that moment, a young man arrives, introducing himself as Kuroda's brother, Iwo Kuroda. The students are surprised to finally meet him, but the young man thanks them for helping with his debt through the game's launch, leaving everyone confused. After what happened, Iwo Kuroda thanked the group for launching the game to help with his debt, explaining that his company isn't producing anything due to a lack of funds. However, the group says they don't understand what's going on. Kuroda then arrives and is surprised to see her brother. After Iwo leaves, the group confronts their producer and she admits that it's true, which upsets Andu. He's angry that she never told them the truth and only used them. This leads the group to decide to leave as they don't agree with what happened. Even Buntarou is upset, stating that it didn't matter how they would be rewarded because they were being used. That night, the protagonist returns to work, and his boss notices something is wrong. Even the children in the neighborhood see him looking down. The next day, Buntarou returns to school and runs into Yuka, who apologizes for leaving. Buntarou tells her that he also decided to leave. Later at work, Buntarou's boss invites him to lunch, but only because he wants to ask him what happened with his plans. Noticing how sad Buntarou is, the man tries to comfort him, saying these things happen. At that moment, Buntarou gets a call from Ogi, who says they've finished the game and are celebrating, so he tells Buntarou to do his best, otherwise it wouldn't be much of a competition. That night, Buntarou gets a visit from Yuka and Atomu. When they're on a rooftop, Buntarou apologizes to them, but they start recalling how satisfying and enjoyable it was to work together and finish their individual tasks. They feel it would have been great to complete the project since everyone put in so much effort. When Buntarou returns to his apartment, he finds the gift Kuroda gave him when they first went out, which makes him remember everything that happened that day. That night, Kuroda is still at the club working. Buntarou arrives and tells her that he wants to see how everything ends, as he's worked part-time at many places but hasn't found where he belongs. Even though he started this at her request, they ended up having fun, which he never expected. So he wants to stay until the end. At that moment, Atomu arrives, saying he overheard the conversation, and like his friend and Yuka, he decides to stay. Yuguisu then appears behind them, saying she's sad that the animation she created won't be seen by others, so despite being upset, she decides to return, but asks Kuroda to apologize. However, Andu arrives and slaps Kuroda, saying that now they're even. Together, the group asks to return because they want to finish the project, and excitedly, they all get back to work. The team worked day and night for 10 straight days. However, when the game is finished, Yuka realizes that her animation is low quality, so they need to reorganize everything. Kuroda tells them to do it again while she delivers the demo to the company herself. The group waits for the game to finish downloading onto the CD. Meanwhile, they ask Kuroda to go to the station and wait for the demo. Once the download is complete, Yuka and Buntarou rush to the station with a briefcase and the CD inside. Despite Yuka falling behind, Buntarou manages to catch the train, and together with Kuroda, they head to the company. After delivering the demo, they realize that finishing the game was an exhausting task. The next day, the group returns to the city where the rest of the team is waiting for them. Buntarou reflects that despite all the difficulties, they always stay together. After a few days, many customers begin shopping at the game stores. Meanwhile, the group returns to school and resumes their daily routine. At one point, they unknowingly start gathering on the way to the club, where they talk about how they can't believe they finally finished the project and will find out how the sales are going, making them feel a bit nervous. Upon arriving at the club, Buntarou opens the door to find Kuroda waiting for them. She tells them that they had a great number of sales, having sold 3,000 copies at launch. She also spoke with a major company that asked for twice how many copies they sold, which excites everyone. However, she mentions that Typhoon sold 4,000 copies at launch, leading them to think they lost the bet and they start to feel down. But Kuroda points out that they achieved those sales with an order of 2,000, which means they sold 6,000 copies in total and Typhoon sold 9,000, so theoretically they won. This makes everyone happy as they managed to win after all their hard work. During a celebration, Kuroda realizes that someone else is outside, and when they go out to check, they find a cake. They believe it was a surprise from their producer, but she runs off and encounters her brother, who congratulates her before simply leaving without saying anything else. That night, the Rokura team goes out to celebrate at a steak restaurant, and Yuka is very excited. The group starts ordering the cuts of meat they want and notices that Yuguisu is acting differently. She's not as shy as usual. They begin to tease her, but Andu is happy because not all teams manage to reach this point and openly express their feelings. Just as they are about to place their order, the waiter arrives and everyone is surprised to see that it's Iwao, Kuroda's brother. He mentions that he works part-time and that the money raised will go to his company, but he also apologizes for the problems caused. The group assures him there's no need to apologize. Nonetheless, Iwao offers them some vegetables as a gift, but no one wants to accept them since they want meat, so to avoid any issues, Buntarou takes them. Later, the group enjoys the evening while saying they never imagined they could win. It's not because they lack confidence, but because they delivered the demo late and thought it was impossible. Kuroda then states that even though they won in terms of sales numbers, Typhoon's game will continue to sell and will be talked about throughout the year. Buntarou says he will keep working to improve their game, but Kuroda proposes that they dissolve Rokura. This surprises everyone, but she wants them to now work on something fun that incorporates everyone's ideas, which none of them agree to as they want to continue perfecting their original game. Although the producer acknowledges that her idea isn't bad either. Then Buntarou receives a call from Ogi, who tells him that his boss is out of control and needs to apologize to some people, so he asks to go in his place. However, Kuroda responds saying they shouldn't try to recruit from her team as that way they will be even. Although everything is resolved, Oja claims to have won as a writer due to the reviews, but the protagonist insists that sales numbers are what really matter. A few days later, the protagonist checks the sales and sees that another game is in first place with over 20,000 copies sold. The most surprising thing for Buntarou is that the writer of that game is the same one who helped him. However, over the following days, he encountered many problems and his popularity declined. Meanwhile, a student asks Buntarou to fill out a form indicating what he wants to be in the future, but he doesn't know what to write. However, when he sees that Kuroda is there, he quickly fills it out and leaves the classroom. Later, the team gathers again to celebrate their triumph on the school rooftop.